From the heart of global chaos to the stories changing Indian lives across the world, this is Skyline with me, Driti. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's story, it is not just about layoffs. It is about fear, survival, and the slow crackdown of American dreams for thousands of Indians. Let's talk about the American dream that is cracking and Indians who are feeling the shock first. One email, one calendar invite, one cold HR meeting, and suddenly a software engineer from Hyderabad, India, a data analyst from Bengaluru, or a product manager from Pune realizes that the life they built in America, it can disappear in minutes. Because across the United States today, layoffs are exploding again. Not in struggling companies alone, not in bankrupt startups alone, but inside the world's biggest and richest tech giants. Name it: Meta, Coinbase, Oracle, Nike, BBC, Amazon, companies worth billions, companies making profits, companies that once promised the future. And hidden inside these layoffs are thousands of Indians. Ladies and gentlemen, according to layoff tracking platform Intelligence, more than 1,621 companies globally have announced layoffs, downsizing, in fact, hiring freeze or reconstructing measures in 2026. Meta alone is planning about 8,000 job cuts. Oracle reportedly announced nearly 30,000 cuts globally. Nike announced 1,400 layoffs and BBC plans to cut 2,000 jobs. And this is creating fear among entire Indian tech community working in America today. And for Indians in America, this is not just a bad news or a headline anymore. This is becoming a survival crisis because when an American employee loses a job, they lose a salary. But when an Indian employee, and that too on H-1B visa, loses a job, they may lose their right to stay in America itself. And that is terrifying difference. Well, the moment layoffs happen, the immigration clock, it starts ticking. 60 days. That's all many visa holders get. Find another company, transfer the visa, clear interviews. In fact, convince HR or leave the country. Can you imagine the pressure? They bought a house in Texas. Your children, they are studying in California. Your parents in India, they depend on your dollar income. You spend years waiting for a green card and then suddenly your company says, we are reconstructing. Now that single sentence, it can destroy an entire immigrant life. And now, this particular fear, it is spreading everywhere across Silicon Valley. But what makes this crisis even more shocking is the reason behind many of these layoffs. Simple: artificial intelligence. The same AI revolution companies that celebrated as innovation is now becoming the reason employees are being removed. Companies are openly admitting it though. This is no longer just a secret. This is now the official corporate strategy. Look at Meta. Meta, the company behind Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, it is preparing one of the largest reconstructing drives in tech. Reports say Meta plans to cut nearly 10% of its workforce, affecting roughly about 8,000 employees. The company has already begun layoffs though, across Realty Labs, Facebook, recruiting, sales, or even operating teams. Meta is shifting away from older metaverse priorities and pouring massive money into artificial intelligence infrastructure instead. The question is, why is this happening? This is happening because Mark Zuckerberg betting everything on AI. Meta plans to spend between $125 billion and $145 billion on AI infrastructure, servers, chips, and data centers. Can you think about those numbers very carefully? More than $100 billion. Now that money, it is not going into hiring thousands of employees. It is going into machines, computing power, AI system, and to balance those massive investments, human jobs, they are being cut. And that is why Meta's layoffs, they are different from the older tech slowdowns. The company is not collapsing at all. Meta is still massively profitable. This is not "we are losing money" story. This is a "we believe that AI can replace parts of human work" story. And that changes everything. You know what? Meta is not alone here. Look at Coinbase, the biggest crypto exchange in the United States, announces layoffs affecting about 700 employees, nearly 14% of its workforce. But what shocked employees, it was not just a layoff. It was the reason openly given by their CEO, Brian Armstrong. Well, he personally shared a company-wide email announcing that the company is laying off nearly 14% of its global workforce. About 700 employees, they are expected to be affected. But what shocked the workers was even more. Well, it was the tone of the message. Well, this was not presented as a temporary crisis. This was presented as a future of work itself. Mr. Armstrong, he openly admitted that Coinbase wants to rebuild itself as an AI native company. He said that the company now wants to become leaner, faster, and more efficient with artificial intelligence at the center of almost everything. And then came the line that is now creating panic among Silicon Valley. The CEO, he admitted that engineers using AI, they are now finishing projects in days that earlier took entire teams weeks to complete. He also revealed that even non-technical teams are now writing production code, while many companies' workflow, they are already being automated. Can you think about how dramatic that shift is? Earlier, companies needed large engineering teams, multiple managers, product coordinators, testers, and operations staff. And now things are changing. One smaller AI-assisted team can do the same work much faster, and that is exactly why Coinbase says it has reached an inflection point. Basically, the company believes that it must reconstruct immediately to survive the future AI economy. Mr. Armstrong said that the company wants to return to the speed and culture of the startup, but this time with AI at its core. And this is where the whole story becomes deeply emotional for Indians in America, because thousands of Indian workers, they are working in tech. They are on H-1B visa. Now for them, layoffs are not just financial setbacks. Well, they become immigration emergency. The moment a worker loses a job, the countdown that begins, as I told you, 60 days, that's all. That's all the visa holders have to find a new job. And that particular job should be willing to sponsor them. And if they fail, then they may have to leave the United States entirely. And you know what? Coinbase employees, they are now facing exactly that fear. The company said affected employees would receive termination emails directly on their personal email IDs, and at the very same time, their access to Coinbase system and communication channels would be immediately revoked. Can you imagine the emotional shock here? You wake up in the morning, your Slack stops working, well, your company access, it disappeared, and email lands into your personal inbox, and suddenly your American life, that becomes uncertain. In the meantime, Coinbase says that the US-based employees will receive a severance package that includes a minimum of 16 weeks of pay base plus an additional 2 weeks for every year worked at the company. Employees will also receive their next equity vesting and the next 6 months of COBRA healthcare coverage. And most importantly, for Indian workers, the company said employees working on visas will receive extra transition support. Now, for employees outside the United States, Coinbase said similar severance support would be offered depending on local laws and consultation requirement. You know, on paper, this looks like a very strong compensation package, right? But think about that. Indians on work visas, money alone, it cannot remove the fear that they had, because the real panic is not about missing one paycheck, right? The real panic is this. The question, what if I cannot find another sponsor before my 60-day deadline ends? And Coinbase, they made it very, very clear that why these layoffs are happening, and they are going to justify that. The company admitted that even though it remains financially strong and well capitalized, the crypto market is still extremely volatile. In fact, Mr. Armstrong said Coinbase wants to reduce costs now, so it can survive future uncertainty and emerge leaner, faster, and more efficient. You know, here Coinbase, it may be just the beginning, because across Silicon Valley today, the same message, it is spreading inside the boardrooms. Smaller teams, higher productivity, more automation, fewer employees. In fact, if we talk about Cognizant, one of the biggest IT companies employing Indians across the world, is now reportedly preparing for a major layoff exercise under a reconstructing program called Project Leap. And the numbers that are being discussed, they are massive. Industry experts believe Cognizant, it could cut anywhere between 12,000 to 15,000 jobs in the coming phase. Wait, can you think about that for a second? Up to 15,000 employees. Now that is not a small correction. That is a workforce earthquake. And the reason, once again, it circles back to the same world that is now haunting the global tech industry: artificial intelligence. Well, across the IT world today, companies are aggressively trying to reduce cost, automate the workflow, and rebuild themselves around AI-driven productivity. Earlier, companies expanded teams rapidly. They hired thousands of engineers, analysts, testers, support staff, and project managers. But now the mindset inside the boardroom, it is definitely changing completely. Executives, they are just asking one brutal question: if AI can do the same work, and that too faster, why maintain such a large team? And that is the dangerous shift now happening inside the global IT firm. Cognizant officially announced that it expects to spend between $230 million and $320 million in severance costs under this new reconstructing initiative. Well, the company did not officially confirm the exact numbers of layoff though, but industry estimates suggest the cut would range about 12,000 to 15,000. And this becomes deeply personal for India. Why? Because Cognizant employ more than 357,000 people globally. And out of them, over 250,000 employees, they are based in India alone. Can you read that again very carefully? More than 250,000 employees in India. That's what we are talking about. That means any large reconstructing inside Cognizant automatically becomes a major story for Indian families, Indian cities, and India's IT ecosystem itself. Well, thousands of middle-class households, they depend directly on these salaries. EMI depends on these jobs. In fact, children's education depends on these jobs. Entire family's future depends on these jobs. And now uncertainty is spreading again. In the meantime, Cognizant CEO Ravi Kumar, he also confirmed that these changes are part of a global program that will impact multiple parts of the organization. And this is not even the first warning sign. Earlier, Cognizant had already launched its Next Gen program, where more than 3,500 roles they were eliminated, while the company also reduced office spaces significantly. But reports now suggest that the latest reconstructing would become the biggest cost-cutting drive in Cognizant history. And that is why employees are nervous. Because what started as isolated layoff inside a few tech firms, it is now turning into an industry-wide transformation. Now, another company, Oracle. Oracle also announced massive workforce reduction, right? Meta is cutting thousands of employees while investing heavily in AI infrastructure. Coinbase openly admits that AI is replacing traditional work structure, and now Cognizant is preparing for one of the biggest reconstructing exercise in the history. Can you imagine? There's a pattern that is becoming visible, and this is where the story becomes even more painful. Because you know what? The crisis facing Indians in America, it is no longer just about layoffs or salary or artificial intelligence. Well, it is now becoming deeply emotional. Behind every H-1B visa, there is a family. There are parents who are growing old in India. There are children growing up in America. There are people trapped between the two worlds. And one heartbreaking story has now shaken thousands of Indians online. Well, an Indian origin tech professional who is working in the United States recently shared what he called the biggest regret of his life. His name is Gautam De, and his story exposes the hidden emotional cost of the American dream. De works in the United States on an H-1B visa. In an emotional LinkedIn post, he revealed that he could not travel back to India to see his dying mother because of visa stamping delay. Can you read that again very carefully? It's very emotional. Not because he did not want to go, not because he did not care to go. Well, the reason is that because the immigration system, it trapped him in an impossible situation. His mother had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. She remained hospitalized for 17 days. During that entire period, Gautam De, He said he desperately tried to secure a visa stamping appointment so that he could fly back to India and see her one last time. But unfortunately, the appointment, it never came in time. And then came the line that broke hearts across social media. I could only see her through my phone screen. I could only hear her voice over the phone. And that will remain the biggest regret of my life. Can you think about the pain inside those particular words? A son watching his mother's final days through a mobile phone. And that too while sitting thousands of kilometers away, because leaving the United States without any proper visa processing, it carried a huge risk. They explained that if he traveled without securing the required appointment, he could have become stranded outside America, that too for months. He feared losing not only his job but also his legal immigration status and his family's future in the United States. And suddenly he was forced into a decision that no human, should be ever be taking that. Be with the mother or protect the future of his wife and his children. That was his choice. And that is exactly what many Indians silently experience while living abroad on work visas. Well, from the outside, the life, it may look really successful, right? Dollar salary, foreign lifestyle, big tech company. But if we think emotionally, many immigrants live under constant pressure. One visa issue, it can destroy years of stability. One immigration delay can separate families. In fact, one layoff can threaten an entire future. And that is why Gautam De's story, it exploded online. Because thousands of Indians saw their own fear inside. They wrote that he moved to the United States in 2007 after being hired for specialized software expertise. He said he did not go there to undercut the salary, but because multinational companies, they needed his skill just to solve critical software vulnerability and technical problem. Now for years, people like him, they helped build America's technology industry. But in the end, even after years of contribution, he felt that he is being trapped by immigration uncertainty, and that too at the most painful moment of his history. And perhaps the most powerful line in his post was this: a dream, it should not become a cage at a moment your family needs you the most. Well, that single sentence perfectly explains the emotional reality many Indian professionals, they now face abroad. The American dream gives opportunity, yes they do, but sometimes it also creates emotional distance, fear and helplessness. And the reaction online, it shows how common this pain really is for Indians. Many people shared very similar experiences though. In fact, one person wrote that they saw their own mother for the last time only through a phone screen, and that too during the pandemic. Others admit that they cried while reading Gautam De's story because they kinda understood the impossible pressure immigrants face online. Someone else wrote that after spending nearly 2 decades in America, they would now choose family over the uncertainty of visa-dependent life. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, today's story, it is bigger than any layoff alone. Because when companies cut jobs, when visa system creates uncertainty, and when immigrants feel trapped between countries, the impact becomes psychological and deeply personal. And now, as AI-driven layoffs spread across Meta, Coinbase, Oracle, Cognizant and other tech giants, thousands of Indians are quietly asking themselves a very difficult question. What exactly are we sacrificing this dream for? Time with parents, family moment, peace of mind or emotional stability? And perhaps the hardest truth, ladies and gentlemen, in today's world is this: many realize the emotional cost only when it is already too late. And maybe this is the biggest lesson from this entire story. For decades, Indians were told that success, it had only one direction. Leave India, go west, reach America, get the visa, build the dream, and millions of them did exactly that. Many studied harder, worked longer, sacrificed more, missed weddings, missed festivals. In fact, missed birthdays, missed very, very precious time with parents because they believed that one day it would all be worth it. And now the world is changing faster than anybody ever imagined. Artificial intelligence is changing the definition of work. Companies are becoming smaller, jobs are becoming temporary, visa systems, they are becoming more stressful. And the same global economy that once praised stability, it is now producing fear and uncertainty. So, This is why today's story, it is not anti-America. This is not anti-technology. This is not anti-success. This is a reality check, a reminder that behind every immigration statistics, there is a human life. Behind every layoff announcement, there is a family. Behind every visa delay, there is emotional pain nobody sees online. Because sometimes the biggest cost of chasing opportunity, it is not financial, but it is emotional. And tonight, as thousands of Indians across the world watch this story, many will silently think of their own lives, their own sacrifices and their own fear. Conversation with family back home, that is very important because the American dream, it still exists. But today it comes with a price many people never fully understand in the beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, from the stories shaping our world to the realities changing Indian lives, this is Skyline with Driti. See you tomorrow.